Greetings and welcome to Beatles Stuffology, where two old friends sit about and talk BS, Beatles stuff, on a track-by-track basis pretty much for the sake of it. My name is McQuarrie, and I'm here with my co-host Andrew Deacon. Say hi, Andrew.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing alright. It feels like ages since we've actually recorded one of these. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. I guess it's kudos for your strategy of making sure we've got enough recordings in the bank. So, since we last spoke, I think we've had a couple of recordings, a couple of podcasts go out, including I Want to Hold Your Hand.
Yes, which
is going quite well. And it's pleased to see that a decent number of people are downloading and listening to these. It would be great, of course, to get some audience reaction. So, dear listener, please do let us know. And I don't know if you want to drop in at this moment the ways in which people can get in touch.
Oh, I can certainly do that. Yeah, you can get a hold of us at our email, which is beatlesstuffology@gmail.com. We're on Twitter at Beatles_ology. And you can also get a hold of my stuff at jgmcquarrie.scot. And we're on all the usual podcast stuff. So, yeah, anywhere you can find podcasts, basically, you can find us.
So that's good. That's just in case people don't always make it to the end of the episode. So I've got the information now. It would be great to get some feedback, because I know there are a lot of Beatles podcasts out there, and it'd be nice to know what you like about what we're doing. So be good to hear from you, folks.
It really would be. And it's also nice to be able to say, when you say dear listener, you're not talking in the singular anymore, which is quite nice as well.
Although actually that's not that I'm not a broadcaster, but that's a broadcasting technique. I think that people get told on radio is that you have to pretend that you're talking to just one person. Then that way you sort of come across with a little bit more warmth and empathy. Anyway, enough of this highbrow kind of discussion. Shall we move on to today's song?
Let's move on to the job's in the bag. Yes, let's move on, shall we? It's If I Fell this week. Lovely. What do you think of If I Fell?
This could be another one of those short ones where I say, actually it's quite a nice song. It's quite a nice song. That's one of the things about doing it this way, is that we come across some really well written songs, and bearing in mind how quickly they were written and then rehearsed and recorded, the quality of the output is just quite incredible.
It really is, and particularly for this being a Lennon song as well. I mean, most of Hard Day's Night is Lennon anyway, but it's one of those songs which definitely allows us to see a kind of more, I don't want to say a McCartney-esque side to Lennon, but it's an unusually tender song for him to write, even at this point in his career. And it's really sweet. It's an absolutely lovely little song.
Yeah, I suppose it's, in terms of what we did last time, let's get rid of all the information that people ought to know about this. I suppose it's, the cliche is, of course, that this is a McCartney-esque type song, but written by Lennon, supposedly just so he could prove that he could do it. It's fine in that respect. It's also, relatively early on in the film when the Beatles are in the studio, and it's just kind of like a nice song. But what I find interesting about it is that although it's ballady, it's still got that little bit of Lennon self-pity in terms of the lyrics. There's still a comparison between partners. So you can love me, but this other relationship, that wasn't quite so good. So he still can't help himself in that respect. Whether or not that's just subconscious, whether that's a deliberate thing, or whether that's him just coming up with some words that match the music, I think is sort of left for speculation, which I realise isn't a great thing, but for a podcast like this where we're meant to be doing the speculating, I'm saying that everybody else, you can speculate, I'm not going to.
Well, I don't know if I want to speculate too much, but I will at least a little bit, which is, I think that there is an attempt in the lyric to write something which is just a little bit more sophisticated than, you know, I want to hold your hand or whatever, that kind of level of writing. The whole, that opening line, you know, because I've been in love before and I found that love was more than just holding hands, suggests, you know, pushing into a slightly deeper approach to relationships than, yeah, I want to hold your hand, or, you know, that kind of stuff. So it's about trying to explore a little bit more of the dimension of that kind of relationship, I suppose. I mean, it's not a very long lyric, so there's only a limited amount of mileage, hence why I'm only speculating slightly in that. But I do think there is some effort there to kind of push it into slightly different kind of lyrical territory from what we've been used to up till this stage. And that figures, because we've been talking about the evolution of the writing as we've been going through the albums, and I think that's quite a visible sort of representation of it at this point in Hard Day's Night.
So your speculation is that referencing holding hands is a deliberate evolution from I want to hold your hand.
More than just holding hands. The more is the key issue there.
Yeah. But you're buying into the McCartney revisionist history, saying, oh well, you know, I was a literature student at school, and so therefore words really interested us. So, you know, look at all these puns. You know, you think it was a deliberate thing?
I don't know if I would go that far, but I mean, the idea that the Beatles are self-referential is hardly an extraordinary one. It wouldn't at all surprise me if this was an early example of it. It's certainly possible. But even if you put that to one side, I just think it's that idea that, yeah, you're exploring more of a relationship, that, you know, it's about slightly deeper than, you know, sort of standard teeny bopper fare. Again, I don't want to lean too heavily on that, but the idea that you have hurt pride, that you have, you know, the pain of loss, you have, you know, a bunch of stuff there, which does slightly, I mean, none of it is unique, none of it is completely original, of course, but it is slightly expanding the kind of emotional palette that a song like this might have, and particularly, again, for Lennon, that's really the thing. He's not normally one to make himself sound that vulnerable.
Well, he still makes himself sound a little bit vulnerable. It's sort of interesting, you know. But I suppose at least he's not sounding kind of bitter and twisted. In this one, or indeed too possessive. I mean, obviously we'll save that for side 2 of this album. That feeling very much returns, doesn't it?
Yes, so, very much.
I mean, you could almost compare it to a very similar song that has a much more, I suppose, sentimental, positive, upbeat lyric, and that, of course, is. You know, 9 minutes into the podcast, well, actually it's a little bit less than that, into the podcast, it's time to reference the Rutles. Excellent. So at this point, dear producer JG, perhaps you could put in a Rutles type sound effect here. A Girl Like You is a perfectly lovely song. It is very reminiscent of this, although I had said in a previous episode, I was trying to work out which one it was really, so clearly I obviously say some things on here that make sense at the time and are utterly forgettable. I did sort of suggest there was an earlier song that sounded more like A Girl Like You than this one. Can't remember what it was now, but it's clearly an attempt to write a song like If I Fell. And it's pretty successful, and it's very, very pleasant. It doesn't have the edge that perhaps Lennon has, even when Lennon's being nice. But it really, really works. I know you have stronger feelings than I do.
I sure do. I love With a Girl Like You. I think it's glorious. I think when it comes to the early Rutles kind of stuff, it's one of the best examples. And I think it's successful for exactly the same reason that If I Fell is, which I think it comes across as very sweet, very endearing, and very genuine. And that's, you know, one of the great things about the Rutles. You know, there's so much love for the source material that just shines through. But it's also a little bit more than that as well. And one of the things about If I Fell is that there are a lot of chord changes in it. Not a lot of chords, but a lot of chord changes. It's constantly shifting. If you try and play it, it's actually, for such a simple sounding song, it's quite difficult because it just never stops. It's very restless as far as the chords go. And that's something that with a girl like you replicates. It does exactly the same thing, but it doesn't do it as. I was going to say, I was going to say it doesn't do it as pastiche. I suppose it is pastiche by its very nature, but it doesn't feel that way. It just comes across as incredibly well executed. And yeah, of course, I mean, it's the Rutles, that goes without saying, but still, not every song is equal. But I think kind of with a girl like you is, I don't know that I would say it's better than If I Fell, but I think it might be as good. And I mean that as a compliment to If I Fell, which I do really like as a song. But with a girl like you is just great. It's just very sweet and genuine and lovely in exactly the same way that If I Fell is.
So I would say in terms of, I think you've perhaps identified a reason why it's not up there with If I Fell, with almost for that realizing it, in that it's not as complex. There aren't as many layers to it as there are with If I Fell. And I think part of that is because it would presumably, if you go by Neil Innes' story, have been written in a hurry because he had to write a lot of songs in a very short space of time. But of course, he didn't really have the same kind of people to play these songs off against that John Lennon had, for example. So the complexity in If I Fell is much more evident. But also, been listening to both songs quite a lot recently, and there is a huge difference in the arrangement, in the in the playing, and also in the production. And again, the Rutles was a much cheaper production all round, and it was obviously done more quickly. But as a song, as a piece of writing, there are similarities, and you could maybe have some sort of sympathy for that argument. But I think when you put in the whole package, you just have to go, man, it's the Beatles. And the Beatles, it's not just John Lennon writing a song and thinking, oh, well, did he mean this or did he mean that? But it's McCartney on bass. It's, Ringo's, really very straightforward, but very effective drumming on this. And it's, well, whatever George is doing. And then you've got, George Martin's production as well. And the harmonies, which of course the Rutles, can't do because it's pretty much all Neil Innes singing. So as much as I love the Rutles, I just think that the more we think about it, the more we talk about it, the more like a boring old muso I might get and go, oh yeah, man, but it's the Beatles. And when it comes to the old top trumps, the Beatles trump everyone every single time, don't they?
Well, yeah, and I'm not gonna judge Neil Innes for not being George Martin, that's for sure. But yeah, I mean, that's all perfectly fair. I mean, yeah. One of the nice things about the way that the instrumentation is recorded for With I Fell is that there is that sense of space in the song. And again, I think it's one of the reasons you see how skilled, or one of the ways I should say that you see how skilled George Martin is as an arranger as well as a producer, because there's lots of space in this song. And that really adds to the atmospherics of it. If there's one thing I definitely do agree with you on when it comes to With a Girl Like You, it's quite full. There's a lot of instrumentation on it. There's not a lot of space, which is clearly, different from with If I Fell. And that If I Fell is just, it's so wonderfully arranged. It's very simple. It's very sparse, but it draws a lot of its power from that sparseness, and it's just really well put together. I mean, you joke about, what's George Harrison doing? But I mean, I think the answer to that is all that's needed. He's not really prominent in this, but this isn't a song that calls for it anymore. He's doing a bit of 12 string. That's fine. That's all this song needs, and it's that restraint, that space that the song has that really lets it resonate.
Right. So I'm now going to do what's called in the business a segue.
Excellent.
Okay, watch this. There's another reason why I'm not quite so hot on the Rutles version, and that's because in the film. A Girl Like You is at the Royal Variety performance, and of course you've got Neil Innes as the Lennon-esque character, making a joke about dedicating it to a very special lady in the audience, Barry's mom, and then invites Dirk McQuarrie to sing this song. And of course, it's blatantly obvious that Dirk McQuarrie, i.e. Eric Idle, is miming, and that it's Neil Innes's voice. And I sort of always find it a little bit odd that Eric Idle, who is both a proficient musician and singer, whatever you think about his singing voice, doesn't actually do any of the playing. It's quite obviously miming for the bass all the way through. So miming in terms of the vocals. So that doesn't quite work for me. And this is the link. Hold on, folks. Of course, because remember, this song is from the film. I nearly said A Hard Day's Rut, but there you go. And actually, what I find really endearing about this section, because obviously for the first two songs we've spoken about, the sections of the film that the songs relate to, this one, Ringo's being a bit of a grump. Ringo is upset, and actually John starts singing the song to Ringo. It's like he's serenading Ringo. So yeah, okay, so If I Fell, but you can sort of see there's that tongue-in-cheek element where it's just like a nice song to sing to someone. And then much like our previous song, what was our previous song, JG? I've forgotten for the moment. There you go, there's some professional broadcasting.
Should Have Known Better, which seems like an ironic title.
There you go. I got it. I did get it. You notice how in the early part of that song, they're playing cards, and then once you get into the song, it is the performance. So here, John is kind of mock serenading Ringo, but then once they get into the performance, into the song, it is a performance. So it's really actually quite clever. And again, I'm not going to get into the whole Dick Lester early pop video kind of thing, but he really did think about the way in which the songs were presented in a fascinating way that is, superior to a lot of what followed.
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, before we go on, let me praise you for your segue. That was truly excellent work there, and I would very much like to commend you for your skill and ability in that area. Thank goodness we're a professional podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
But unsurprisingly, I'm going to agree with you. I think the presentation of this song in the movie is just so charming. And the problem is, when you're talking about the movie, is it's so hard not to just run out of synonyms for charming, because that's what the whole thing is. Everything about it is charming. But of all the charming things that happen in the movie, this is one of the most charming. I'm going to have to stop using the C word now. But it's just delightful. It's such a sweet little moment. And it just very eloquently captures what the song does. And then, as you say, it segues into that performance, which is also just lovely to see. It's such an accomplished piece of filmmaking for something that was knocked off in a ridiculously kind of quick and kind of, I don't know, yeah, I was going to say slipshod. That's not fair at all. But it's such a quick and hasty fashion, let's say. And yet it really looks like all the time in the world has been spent of it to compose those shots, to make it work with the music, to kind of figure everything out. And yet we know that's not what it was like. We know that this was just like a super quick feature, knock it out, make your money, move on. And yet nothing about the movie really implies that when you watch it. And this is one of the sequences that I think is an absolute standout there. It's just gorgeous.
Yeah, that's one of those moments in the discussion where we both agree, and actually I've got nowhere to go with that.
Okay, well, so, it's probably time to go for another segue.
Have you got one?
Well, it's not really a segue. I'm just going to talk about something else, really. So if you want to call that a segue, sure, let's go with that.
Okay, hang on. Let's try this then. So,
okay.
So that moment in the film turns into a sort of a full-on performance. The Beatles did play this quite a lot live. There you go. You see, that was quite good. However, I don't know if you've seen or listened to any of the recordings of them playing this live. They do play it at a much faster tempo. Although it's worth pointing out that even for a ballad, it's actually still quite up tempo and pacey a song. But of course, they played it even faster, on stage, as though they recognised the fact it was a popular song, but just couldn't wait to get through it and reduce it from whatever 2.5 minutes to 2.
Yeah, I have seen the live performances, and I feel they lack something a little bit, and I think it's that thing about them being played a little bit faster, it strips the subtlety out of the song, and that kind of undermines it a little bit. So the song is fine live. I wouldn't want to say that it was bad, but it's functional. It's there. I mean, I was gonna say it's played fast, but it is slowing down from the up tempo numbers. But it's just it just feels like it's functional. It's there in the set list. Bloody bloody blah. Okay, on to the next one. It definitely loses something in translation.
Yeah, it reminded me of and there's another Beatles podcast. Can you believe it? There's more than one Beatles podcast.
I find that hard to believe, but carry on.
I know it's one that looks in particular at production, and actually, it was the episode I was listening to was discussing George Harrison's "Isn't It a Pity," from his amazing triple album. Anyway, and I love that. I love that album.
Oh yeah.
But of course, it was talking about the fact that it was offered to the Beatles, reasonably early. But then when you listen to it, you think it's so not a Beatles song, because as good as it is, it's just slower than anything the Beatles would ever have recorded, and so you can sort of see why John and Paul might have thought, do you know what, this isn't really for us. So, even the ballads are pacey, possible exception, I suppose. Well, could you call Julia a ballad? I suppose it's a ballad type song.
Yeah.
But you sort of think Martha, My Dear, and Michelle, and and all the ones that end up on Revolver. There's not anything that really slows the tempo down.
In My Life.
Yeah, possibly.
Might be the other exception that proves the rule. But but I mean, as a general point, I do agree with you. And I think, I love Isn't It a Pity? It's such an amazing song. I utterly adore it. But I can understand, not only in terms of its speed, but in terms of its content, it doesn't quite fit. Could you imagine Isn't It a Pity on a Hard Day's Night? I don't know. I love that song, but, time and a place. And I don't think...
I couldn't picture it on any of the, even the later albums. It just it just doesn't work. I wouldn't even take Maxwell Silverhammer off Abbey Road for it.
I like even Maxwell Silverhammer.
Isn't It a Pity is such a more substantial and interesting song. It just wouldn't work. Or would it? There you go. Email and tweet. Anyway, never mind. So I suppose the other thing that sort of sticks out to me is that there are a ridiculous number of covers of this song, and there are an awful lot of them that were in 65 and 66. And then it sort of tails off. It's quite interesting looking at that Secondhand Songs website, because it then seems as though people have kind of forgotten about that era of the Beatles until you then get into the 2000s, when the number of covers seem to start up again. But predominantly, they're just kind of formulaic, and they're just attempts by people to show how they can harmonize in a way that's basically the same as the Beatles. So it's like, a couple of acoustic guitars and some harmonies, and away we go. The one notable exception was Julie Covington, who I think was singer of Don't Cry For Me Argentina from Evita. She may have been in the original stage production, I think. And what I thought was interesting about that was that there's one point in Lennon's vocal delivery in this that kind of jars with me, and that's in that sort of introduction where he sort of goes quite sharply from help to me to help me understand. Help me understand. And yet actually when Julie Covington sings it as a stage performer, someone who's trained, it's a lot smoother. The transition is actually quite exquisite at that stage, in a way that Lennon, for all his skills and abilities, isn't able to convey. And the other one for me that made me have a little chuckle, that was in some way different, was Chet Atkins. Oh man, a country cover. But I suppose the thing about Chet Atkins doing it is actually it's from an album called Chet Picks the Beatles, and there's a pun there. See if you can work out what that is.
Thanks, Chet.
But then I don't necessarily think that Chet Atkins was being that fussy about some of his material, because a couple of years later he recorded a cover of Yakety Sax called, play for the pun, Yakety Axe. Oh yes, there you go. Actually, his Beatles album was quite successful compared to some of his other recordings, but that probably says more about the material. But in the same way, I suppose that George Martin sort of assumed that perhaps some of the orchestration records that he put out would have been perhaps a little bit more successful than they ended up being. There was a point, I suppose, at which some of these things would have hit some kind of saturation point, but we're not there yet.
No, not quite yet. It's a funny one. If I fell, it's not. I don't know if it's one that really screams for much in the way of cover versions. It's not. It's sort of, I hate to say it, oh, it's fine the way it is, but kind of that. I don't know. It's fine. It doesn't. Doesn't necessarily need an awful lot more than it's got. When you hear anyone else playing this song, and here, this is my attempt at a segue here. So please get your applause ready. When you hear when you hear other people playing this song, it does kind of, it really helps to reinforce the skill with which the Beatles play. Not in terms necessarily of virtuosity, but certainly just in terms of, well, I mentioned restraint earlier on, and that's part of it. But it's just everything about the way that they actually play the song really pushes it to that next level. There's some perfectly good cover versions of this song out there, but they're all just fine. Whereas they don't have that extra thing that the Beatles version has, and I think a lot of that does come down to their playing. They are. I mean, it's pointless to point out how good musicians they are. That goes without saying. But it's not about being flash. In fact, this song is about the exact opposite of being flash. But that's exactly what this song needs.
I don't think there's many occasions in their catalogue where they attempt virtuosity over the song, where it becomes a more important thing than the song. Everything is done to support and embellish the song. So I know you said it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it. They are phenomenal musicians, but everything is in the interest of the song. And just for a little bit of context, dear listener, we sort of implied earlier that of course we do record these in advance, and we're recording this mid-ish January, and the news this week was announced that David Crosby had died, and it's only a couple of weeks on, I think, since Christine McVie died. And these are people who are understandably lauded for their very long and successful careers. And they were clearly very good at what they do, but I'm not sure that what they do or did was always for the benefit of the song. And the thing that always gets mentioned with Christine McVie is Songbird, and Songbird's perfectly lovely, but there's not a great melody in there.
No.
It's nice. The sentiments are nice. And you can see why it would have worked at a Fleetwood Mac concert, because it sort of changes the tone. It takes away from the bombast and the various other elements that the band put on. But if you go back through David Crosby's back catalogue, that his songwriting wasn't about melody. The bands that he played in, particularly sort of the later stages of his time with the Byrds, and it's the Eagles, then with the Byrds, and then with Crosby, Stills and Nash, Nash and Young, they were sort of embellished by the virtuosity of either the players or of the harmonies. And you sort of strip it away and you think, is there a tune I can hum there? Will that tune rattle around in my head, or does it just give me that sort of nice emotional uplift to hear that wonderful harmony? And as great as some of their involvement was with these acts, and they clearly talented, passionate people, brilliant performers, so on and so forth. I just think when it comes to it, the Beatles knock them out of the park when it comes to just the basics of songwriting, melody, and then instrumentation, arrangement, and the playing as a package. It's phenomenal. And even a mid-range song like If I Fell lingers in the memory as a tune. I suppose the other thing that some people are kind of lauded for are the lyrics as well. There are people who supposedly write these great lyrics, and it's deep and meaningful, but they forget about the tune. With the Beatles, it doesn't really matter. You can buy into the elements of the lyrics if you like, but everything else in the package, certainly at this stage of their career, is so spot on that it just absolutely beats everything else that's out there. And some people will get good. The Kinks will produce some amazing songs. The Stones have some fantastic singles, but the depth and the breadth. There you go. There's something for the outtakes of the Beatles' work is just a reminder that if anyone ever tells you that they're overrated, always refer back to Danny Baker's line. Actually, they're probably the most underrated band in the world. We just do not appreciate just how good they are. And it's become a bit of a cliche, but I think it happens to be true. Anyway, rest in peace and all of that. Yeah. So, you had great careers, but let's face it, you weren't the Beatles.
No, I mean that is true of literally every other act on the planet. So that's fair enough. But I mean, I think particularly what you're saying about everything is subservient to the song. I think that's really the most important point. If everything is there to support the architecture of the basic song, and even early days, but even early like George Harrison songs or Ringo songs, the same thing can be seen. It's not something which is just a Lennon-McCartney thing. It is always, because it's always for the betterment of the group. It's not about the individual song. It's not necessarily about the individual person who's putting it forward, but it's about the betterment of the group. And doing that every single time for every single song on every single album and every single single, that's the difference. It's that level of effort which goes into absolutely everything. And at this stage, there's nobody in the 60s that can touch them on that. That's why they're such an outstanding group. That's why they stand apart from the pack at this point. And the playing, the skill, the musicianship, all of that, it's all great. George Harrison is obviously going to go on to be one of the greatest guitar players of all time. He's probably not in 1963, 1964. That's not an insult, but he's still learning. He's still developing his skill as they all are. And that developmental process is one of the things which makes the Beatles such a fascinating group to follow, such a fascinating group to spend time with. But even at this stage, again, as I said earlier, like all he's doing in this is a 12 string, but that's all he needs. It's not a demerit that that's what he's doing in this song. If anything, it's the exact opposite. It's precisely what's needed here. And that in support of the song is, for me, that's what I love about the bands that I love. That's the thing that matters most. Not showing off, not being flash. And, I can appreciate virtuosity as much as anybody, of course, but that's not ultimately the thing that really matters to me. My guitar heroes aren't Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton. They're Peter Buck and David Byrne. They're not people who are necessarily these big flash virtuosos, but they're the people who are doing the right thing for the song. And again, like If I Fell is such a perfect example of that, just to pull it back to the song we're supposed to be talking about. But it really is. It's not flashy. It's not showing off. It's just a very sincere, gentle, lovely little song that has exactly what it needs.
Johnny Marr. Okay, that's what I'll say on that. So bearing in mind we've just lauded the Beatles as being really, really, really good. Ironically, I'm then going to say 6 out of 10 for If I Fell.
Okay, that's a surprisingly low mark. Would you like to justify that in any shape or form?
Well, I've given, but my feelings on this ratings thing in general. That it's a daft exercise.
That's why it's so much fun.
I've given A Hard Day's Night, and I Should Have Known Better 7 out of 10. And this isn't as good a song as them. I've given This Boy 6 out of 10, and I'd say this is as memorable as This Boy. So it's nothing. It's nothing more than just that, really. I like it, but then please, to qualify, folks. Remember that 6 out of 10 for the Beatles would not equate to, say, if we did this about, I don't know, Bachman Turner Overdrive, and they gave one of no, I'm definitely not going to do that. So they gave one of
That's correct.
6 out of 10. That doesn't mean it's as good as If I Fell. That's just 6 out of 10, with 10 being the best Bachman Turner Overdrive song. And obviously a 10 out of 10 for the Beatles is going to be a better, anyway, you know where I'm going with that. So 6.
Grading on a curve, I think, is the expression you're looking for. But okay, 6 is fine. I'm going to go for 6.5. And not just to annoy you with a half point. It's great. I mean, I also gave A Hard Day's Night and I Should Have Known Better 7 and 7. I don't think it's as good as either of those two songs, but I do really appreciate the craftsmanship that went into this, and 6 feels a bit miserly to me, so I'm going to go with 6.5.
Okay, good. That sounds like a rap.
Does indeed. I'm going to repeat all the stuff we said at the start of the episode as well about getting in touch, because we want people to get in touch. Please get in touch. It would be really lovely to hear from you.
Okay. I'm just going to play my phone for a couple of minutes then while you do that. If that's okay.
Lovely. Yes, that's absolutely fine. You occupy yourself in whatever way you feel is best. But before I do that, I also want. It turns out we have a few listeners in the Ukraine. I have no idea why, but I want to give our listeners in the Ukraine a shout out. Hello, listeners in the Ukraine. Please listen.
Hello, Ukraine. Yeah. Oh, and actually, I forgot I was going to launch a competition. I mentioned this to our many, many, many followers on Twitter. I could probably spend the next 30 seconds naming each and every one of them. Folks, if you can work out which episode we forgot to publish, bearing in mind we're doing a chronological podcast, we forgot to publish one. We've recorded it. It's in the bank. We forgot to publish it. Send us on a postcard your suggestions to BBC Television Centre W1A 1AA, I think was the old television centre address from memory, or alternatively use any of the communication methods that JG is about to mention, and we will send you an autographed copy of said podcast episode.
It's incredibly generous of you to say that we forgot to post it when what you mean is I forgot to post it. Or maybe I can blame the hosting thing. Maybe I tried and it got swallowed by the internet. There'll be some excuse I can come up with. It doesn't necessarily mean the blame falls on my shoulders.
You do all the hard work, so I'm trying to share some of the blame. You do all the hard work. I just turn up and waffle.
Okay, well, that's fine. Our waffling days are over for this episode, though. So you can contact us by email. We are BeatlesStuffology at gmail.com. We are on Twitter, as Andrew mentioned. We are Beatles_ology. Please follow us. It would be nice to have some followers. You can find more of my writing at you can find more of my writing at www.jgmcquarrie.scot. Also, please check out my other podcast, which is Talking Trek to You, where a noob and an expert go through the original Star Trek series episode by episode. Please also like, rate, and review our podcast on whatever podcast you're using so that more people can find the show. Next week, we will be happy just to dance with you. But until then, keep listening.